Hello everyone, welcome back. This week we're going to take a slightly different approach, I think. And for those of you that want to see some real-time, not sped up footage of me problem solving live, this video is for you. And we're going to be doing some Christmas themed Blender art, namely covering a bunch of stuff in snow and having a play around with some procedural tools. So let's get straight into it. I want to be able to procedurally make a little trench of snow. I want to be able to edit that trench with a spline. I want it to dynamically change between snow and rock, depending on the angle. And then I want to be able to bring in a bunch of assets, scatter them, and have them covered in snow with a single click. So that's where my end goal is for this jam session. And let's get started. So first off, let's just bring in this plane. We'll subdivide it a bunch and we'll apply rotation scale. I'm going to bring in this curve, and what I want to have happen is for this curve to be able to influence the offset. So create this kind of effect where wherever I place the curve, that's where the offset's going to be. So let's see how we can achieve that. So for offsetting any geometry in the geometry nodes workspace, we use a set position node, and I want to offset it on the z-axis. So that's my offset ready to go. I'm just going to pin this, and then I'm going to bring in an object info and I drop my curve. So we've got our curve here. And how do we convert that into the offset? Well, we're going to want to use a geometry proximity, and we'll go distance into offset, and I'll click relative, or maybe it's position. I'm not sure. And there's a little exclamation point there, and it's because it's not realized geometry yet. And in fact, it's not geometry at all, it's just a curve. So I need to convert that curve to a mesh with a curve to mesh. And then I'm just going to drag out profile curve, and we'll use a quad for now. I'll set that on maybe 10 centimeters. So currently it's offsetting, but it's on all axes. So I'm just going to use a combine XYZ node, plug that into the Z-axis. So it's only influencing up and down. And then to be able to control each level of this equation, I'm just going to get a map range node. Let's scale this up a bit. So far so good. And after this, at the end, let's go set shade smooth. So this is a good start. Let's turn wireframe on. So let's have a look at this map range and see if we can get that to work for us a little bit more. So we'll drag these sliders around and we'll see what they do. So from min and from max. Okay, so from min is going to define the bottom width of the trench, and from max is going to define the top width of the trench. And then to max on here, I don't actually want this to move around at all. Let's do the opposite. So to max 1, to min. Yeah, so the plane is going to stay where it is, and then I'm just going to have it dip or rise relative to that curve. So I'm going to leave that set to 1 and edit this. And then we've got the top and bottom here. So the nice thing about this map range node is I can now get a value, and let's go from max. So max, I'm just going to copy that, paste it into the value. So no changes there so far. And then from min, just going to use a math node, sorry. So I'm going to keep that into the max. I'm going to plug this min into the top slot. And now we can change that. So it's always going to be tied to this value here. So that means this can control the width, and this here, because it's using some math and referring to this value, it's basically, that's going to be our sort of steepness control. So width, steepness, you can kind of edit those at the same time. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to, let's just subdivide this, subdivide mesh. Before that, maybe 2, just so we've got a bit more detail here. And the first thing you'll notice is this is quite jagged. So a node I'm really enjoying recently is just to soften that, we're going to search for blur attribute. And this is pretty much going to function exactly the same as a smooth modifier. We can just up the iterations. It's just going to smooth out those values. I'd really love actually if they added a node like this to the shader editor as well. But there's some workarounds we can talk about later. For that. At the moment, here's our dynamic curve trench. but I do want to make this feel a little bit more natural. So let's add some more information. So in between this and the map range node, or maybe after the map range node and after the blur, I'm just going to add a mix color, pull the factor all the way up, and we'll add a Voronoi. Now we're just experimenting here. And let's set that to something like overlay. Seems to work nicely. And in fact, I can probably just use the map range node here. So it's a great node. There we go. I'll keep it somewhat jagged. Add some detail. If I want to sort of increase or decrease the intensity, I can just use the map range node. And let's say I wanted to add just a touch of randomness to this. Let's just grab a noise texture, see what happens when we plug it into the vector here, and add a little bit of distortion maybe. It's quite fun. Cool. I think that'll do us for now. Let's keep it simple, and we'll only add more detail if we feel like we absolutely need to. Otherwise, this is going to start having some performance troubles. And let's have a look at the shader. So we'll go into the shading workspace and hit new. And to start with, let's create a simple snow material. So turn rendered on, and let's take a look at this. So basically want it to be white, and then just get that speckled reflectivity that snow has. And so for that, again, I'm going to use a Voronoi and plug it straight into the roughness, bring up the scale, and I'm going to set this to smooth, put the scale on like 500 maybe. And one thing I want to do is, let me just Control-Shift-Click on this so we can preview it. One thing I want to do is, at the moment, as I scale this up and down, the size of the Voronoi is scaling as well. I kind of want that to be static. So with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, I'll just hit Control-T, and I'll set this to Object instead, into the vector. That's still going to scale relative to the object, because when you don't have anything else selected, it's going to select itself. So I'm going to drag in an empty here, and I'm just going to eyedrop that. I call this snow scale. So now when I scale this up, the Voronoi stays the same scale. It's a bit hard to see, and probably going to be worse with YouTube compression. But where's my empty here? Snow scale. So to edit this again, I'm just going to turn this right down, 0.01, 0.1. I'll leave it at 1. And let's Control-Shift-Click on the BSDF again, and just have a quick look at this. So that's our pattern for the roughness. I'm going to bring in a ramp here, and let's just say, instead of completely shiny, let's have it somewhat shiny. There we go. All right, that's pretty basic. The other thing I'd like to do, and this is a bit of a cheat that I discovered recently, and I forget the Blender creator, but I'll link them in the vid at this point, because they had a really nice trick for faking a little bit of that natural snow color variation. So for that, we're just going to blend between white and like a light blue. So let's plug that into the color. And then to blend between that, I'm just going to do a layer weight set to facing. And what that's basically doing is, I'll drag in a sphere here so we can see. Hit Control-3 for sub D and shade smooth. I'm going to go click on the other thing, Shift-Click that is, and Control-L and M to link materials. And this layer weight is basically blending between the two colors based on the view angle. So as the geometry curves away from the view angle, it's going to change color. And I'm basically using that as a cheat for kind of simulating that ambient bounce light that comes in from the sky. So that's our snow. Let's select that, Control-G, we'll hit Tab, we'll call it snow. And next up, I want to work on rock. So for the rock, I'm dragging a Principled BSDF. And for this one, I am actually going to use a texture. So I got my file browser on my second screen here. I'll just look for a nice rock texture. So I've got this nice one here, which let's just take a look at. So that's probably a good starting point. And again, I'm going to make the same fix that I did with the snow, and that is change it to object. And we're going to select empty. I know this does say snow scale, but what that's going to do is allow us to scale up and down. And again, the texture scale is not going to change. Just really what you want for environment textures where you're making lots of edits to it, and it's not going to mess up. It's not based on the UV map or anything. So I'm going to set the rock scale something like that for now, 0.2 maybe. And already from this kind of view, you can see there's a slight bit of tiling to this texture. So let's do some things to make it feel a bit more natural. And for this section, I am happy to point you to CG Matters YouTube channel. I'll give you a link down below as well for that. He both talks about using a Voronoi texture for this and how to blur textures as well. So that's what we're going to do now. Big shout out to him for the awesome information. So we've got this object, right? And we've got the rotation of the texture here. So I want to be able to affect that rotation with the Voronoi texture for one. So you can see that now it's kind of randomly rotating this texture here based on the value from the Voronoi. So I'm going to highlight this mapping, this Voronoi, and I'm going to plug this into the vector. So again, it's using this, so it's going to be independent of the object scale, which is what we want. And now what I'm going to do is, before the Voronoi, I'm going to mix, let's go mix color, and I'm going to mix between that and a white noise texture. So again, using the same vector coordinates, we'll plug that into B, and you can see that's going to be jittering between, and just to reduce the blur there, I'm just going to drag this out just ever so slightly, so it's softening that transition. And let's have a look at this texture now. So here's before, we've got some hard seams, and here is after, a bit more natural. So already we've kind of removed that tiling sensation, and we can tweak the size of this here. Let's go something like that. I'm pretty happy with that. So let's move on. Okay, so going into rendered view here, let's add a little bit more information to this. And for this, I'm just going to drag out displacement, set to height, plug that into displacement. And over in the shader settings here, go to settings and let's go displacement and bump. Press Control 1 for a subdivision modifier, and we'll make sure adaptive subdivision is checked. And I'm just going to reduce the height to something small, like 0.02. Now let's just disconnect the color so we can see what's happening. So yeah, that's adding a little bit of geometry displacement. And then we've also got our rock going on here. So I'm going to set this for now to bump only, because really that's giving us like a good bit of normal information. But it's going to run a lot faster when I'm not calculating displacement while I'm jamming. The other thing I want to do is I want this rock to be looking a little bit more like a Nordic rock. So like a black volcanic rock. And I could search for a nice black volcanic rock, but a nice trick that I really enjoy is just bringing in a color ramp, and we can take the values from this rock and assign them to whatever colors we want. So I'll drag that down, and we can take these values here and convert them into something a bit more volcanic looking. So there's our rock. I'll Control G to group that. We'll tab out, call it rock. So here comes the fun part. And before I go any further, let's just save. So I want to be able to blend between the snow and the rock now. So I'm going to Control Shift and right click and drag with the node wrangler enabled to get a mix shader. And I want to be able to blend using the normal information. So I'm going to bring in a geometry. We'll drag out the normal. I'm going to separate XYZ so that we're only using the Z information. And let's use a map range node here. And I need to swap the snow and the rock placement. So I'll just swap these values from 1 to 0 to start with. And then I can start tweaking these. So it's going to tell Blender at what angle should you start measuring from. And what I don't want to have happen is for this bump to be showing up on the snow. So what I'm going to do is let's group this here. And I'm going to call it Snow Blend. And I can call on that anywhere now. So if I go into rock here, we'll search for Snow Blend. I can take that value and let's get a mix color and just run it in before this displacement. I'll plug this into B and let's just choose a blending mode that cancels it out. So let's go maybe screen. Okay, it's not screen. Opposite of screen would be multiply. Okay, great. So now it's only showing up in those rocky areas. So let's tab out of this. I've got to select this group input to tab into the main section. So far so good. I do want to edit this a little bit more. So let's see if I can't remove the snow from the factor. Let's go mix color. I'm going to drag out noise texture. And let's see how multiply works for us again, potentially. We'll grab a map range node just so we can tweak the intensity. Okay, that doesn't seem to affect the snow at all. So it looks like I'll have to actually edit that map and pass it through from the displacement shader. So let's go back here into the rock, and I'm going to pass out a separate value here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to remove something else from this. So let's use a noise texture and just see. Okay, I think that's doing what we want. Bring in a map range, try that again. So I'll drag up the minimum value, and there we go. I'll see how this works. The downside of this is that we are losing some of that displacement info. Let's just see what happens if we drag a bump node in. Okay, so we've got a bump node in now, and that is bringing that detail back, but because it's running through the bump, it is not affecting the snow placement. So displacement now, set to bump only, is affecting that blend somewhat. Now I can edit the frequency that appears, or removes the snow, I should say. So it's a subtle change, but here's before, where it's applied globally, and here's after, where it's a little bit more natural, a little bit more patchy. And let's plug the object info here. Just going to duplicate this, go into the noise texture, just to remove any of that stretching again. And I've got a bit of stretching on the rock here as well, for some reason. And we'll just double check. So for whatever reason, the mapping is a little bit funny there. And actually what I do need to do to make this behave even better is, instead of flat projection, I'm going to go box projection. Just wait for that to reset, and I'll just up the blend. I think that should solve most of the issues I was having. So I'll reset rotation here. Let's have another look. Yeah, I think that combination of things has helped. So just rotating that 45 sideways a little bit, just to catch some of those slopes a little bit more naturally, seems to have helped. Let's go rotate RX 45 as well. So now it's kind of like the direction of that box project is optimized for slopey surfaces. So I'm losing a lot of that stretching that I was getting before, a little bit of it. So the next thing I want to do is just add a little bit more natural transitions in that snow. So we'll tab out, we'll go to our snow blend. And right now, this is kind of our contrast. So I'm going to do the same little tool setup that I did before, and we'll say minimum value is 940. So we'll paste that here into the top, and our maximum value is 870. So we'll drag out a math, and I'm just going to minus 0.07 so we can match that. So now we have the same degree of control that we had in the other case, where we can change the placement of that transition. And then using this, we can also tweak the intensity of the transition. So something like that maybe. And that's feeling a lot more natural, like the snow has kind of melted into pockets. So I want to influence this transition. And to do that, let us tweak the normal. So I'm going to run a mix color, and let's drag in a noise. And we'll slowly drag up the factor using shift. And you can see as I increase that scale, it's starting to tweak that transitional edge. Let's go Control T, and we'll do the same thing as before. I'm just going to select that object here so that it scales naturally when I scale things, and increase the factor a bit more, and just play around with these settings until I get sort of like a natural, do some distortion as well, until I get a natural feeling to it. So I might need to tweak some of the other settings to compensate. And I'm getting a bit too much information on that Z-axis. If you don't want to miss out on any videos, tools, asset packs, definitely consider joining the mailing list in the description below. So it's a bit of push-pull, but once it's set up, it's pretty ready to go. So I'm kind of happy with that, I think. Again, it's all still 100% dynamic, super fun. So the next thing I want to do in this little scene here is let's bring in some assets and figure out how we might cover them with snow. So I'll go into my asset browser and let's bring in a few rocks. So we wanted to bring in these rocks here, and I want to make them match this environment. So the first thing I want to do is kind of match that rock color, and we're going to use the same trick as before. I'll go to my rock here, I'm going to copy this color ramp. We'll go to my rock and we'll paste it and just tweak these values till we get something that sort of roughly matches. There we go. That's close enough. I can drag this out into a bump node. Let's just see how that looks. Make sure it's plugged into height. Just drop down the distance, something like that maybe. And now we want to add snow to this. So we've already got our snow blend and our snow material. So we should have everything we need already. So we need our snow material, our snow blend. I'm going to Control Shift right click and drag for a mix shader and plug our blend into the top. And the nice thing about this is because that mapping is set to be independent of an object, it means that I can rotate it around and it's going to update live. And one thing I might want to do is be able to tweak the snow transition on a per object basis. So I'm going to go into that snow blend again and I'll right click, shift, drag through here so that I can drag this out into the group output. I might have to do this just by going into the group and adding an input. Now I can plug this in. Let's set the default to 0.7 like it was before over there. And because this is now an exposed value in the group, I can tweak that transition on a per object basis. And I might want to tweak the blend as well. So I'll add another socket. I'm going to call this coverage and transition, sure. And I'm going to plug that into here and it's set to minus 0.03. So default, set it to that. And default just means that when I bring in a new snow blend, it'll be preset to those kind of stock values, just in case I want to do this with something else. So minus 0.03. Now I can just tweak this a little bit. And I kind of want a bit more fine control over this. So inside this shader, I'm just going to run a math node. And let's just divide this by 10 for now. We'll tab out, wait for that to update. And that just means that I don't have to be quite so careful. I might even divide that by 100. And now you can see I can play around with like much higher values. So here we go, here's our rocks. Tweak coverage, tweak transition. So this is quite fun, it's pretty performant. So for any kind of scenes where you want some basic rocks in here, not bad. And it's nice that the snow shader matches. But what I want to do now is, at the moment, this is very flat. It's very obviously, like when you get up close, it's still very much recognizably a shader. And I want to actually add some snow volume to objects that I drag in. So let's figure out how to do that. So I'll drag in a new rock, and here's a photo scan rock. I think I got this from Blender Kit. And we'll do the same thing. We'll grab this ramp, I'll apply it beforehand, and I quite like that rock texture. So I'm not going to completely remove it. Just going to drag this out into a mixed color. Let's grab some of the original as well. That's quite nice. So we've still got like that color variation from the original, but it's more in line with the surrounding environment. So I want to be able to cover this with snow. And for that, I want snow to rest on the upwards facing areas of the mesh. So while we work on something that does that, let's recreate a very simple version of the rock. So something like that, shade smooth. So basically I want snow to be resting down here and up here, but not on the slope. So for that, we're going to use geometry nodes and we'll call this one cover in snow. So for this, I'm going to use a raycast node, and we need something to cast rays down onto the object to cover it in snow. So what I'm going to do is grab a bounding box, and that's just going to say whatever dimension the mesh may be, let's make a box around it. Let's get a transform geometry, and I'll scale that on the Z to 0, which turns it into a plane. We'll run a merge by distance, so it's just a single plane. And I'm also going to offset this. I might get the maximum value and plug that into translation. Let's go combine XYZ, and let's just take the Z, I think. And I'm just going to add some math to that. Let's maybe add 0.5. Let's go multiply by 2 maybe. I think that's probably close enough. Eventually this does like overlap, but generally speaking, I think it's going to work for our purposes. So let's just test. We'll go cover in snow. The nice thing about that is you can F3 and just search for it and add it. Just make sure I apply rotation and scale. And there we go. So we've got this plane hovering over, and that's what we're going to use to raycast our snow. So let's grab a group input. I'm just going to Control Shift, right click, drag to join at the end there, so that we've got our original mesh preserved. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute points on faces on that plane. Just going to make sure I've applied scale on this. And then I want to cast those down onto the geometry. So let's go raycast. And for this, I want the target geometry to be the original geometry. And then for this distribute points on faces, I want to grab set position and let's go hit position into position. That seems to be working. So now I've got particles on top of my mesh here. I can use those to go points to volume, and we'll go volume to mesh, and that's the start of our snow. Let's go set shade smooth. We'll set this to size, and I want the size and the radius to be relative to each other. So same trick as we used before. We'll go 0.3. We'll plug that in. We'll use a math node to add 0.2. So that should be the same now. And that just means that instead of having a static size, the voxel size is going to be relative. So this is our size control. So I'm going to shift right click drag, and I'm going to drag this out and type in group input. Okay, maybe not. Let's just drag it out from here. Group input, there we go. And we'll go, since this is now exposed in this, I'm going to call this snow amount because it seems that it expands the amount of snow. I'm going to bring this down just a little, I think, or maybe more, just so we're not losing too much detail. So in the group, I'm going to go snow amount. And what other control do we want? We've got adaptivity here, which just kind of merges this together a little bit. We'll leave that for now. What I want to do is affect the amount of points. So I'm going to change this to Poisson disk so that I can set a minimum distance. Let's bring the density right up now so we get full coverage. So just to preview that, let's set the density max. Without this distance minimum, it's just going to set the density to like something infinite, right? Super high dense, which is going to be kind of kill the performance. So if I set minimum distance, it's going to be sort of even spacing. So this minimum distance we want to use, so we'll drag it out, do group input, and I'll call this snow coverage. And because I don't want to break Blender, I'm just going to say that the minimum should be 0.1. Same with the default. That means that I can change the density, but it's going to stop me from breaking my scene if I go too low. So what that looks like in practice is we've got this coverage here, basically. Let's make this a bit more natural though. And this is probably a good time to start previewing this on an actual rock. Let's make sure rotation and scale are applied, and we can go F3. I like about this, I can just type in cover in snow and it will cover it in snow, which is quite fun. And let's go snow amount. It's more, it's less. And I almost had a crash there. Let's bring that up to 0.7. And I'm just going to set some minimum values. So maybe 0.1 can be my minimum. So snow amount, I'm just going to go minimum 0.1. So I want this to be able to melt. And how do we do that? Well, same way we blurred the other objects, we're going to get a set position. I'm going to drag out the position, which is not going to change anything. But now we're just going to blur that position with blur attribute, maybe offset. If for whatever reason it wants me to do that, let's change that to vector. Okay, so to smooth out, so we want to smooth out or kind of melt this snow a little bit. So let's get a set position. And by default, we just want to do whatever the position is. And then we want to blur that position. Now I'm going to change this to vector. We'll do the iterations up. And it's kind of just smoothing the snow. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to unplug distance min, and we'll just go density factor for snow coverage. And it's going to give us a little bit of randomness. So that's our snow coverage. And over here, we've got some iterations for like smoothing it out, and that's going to sort of simulate that effect of snow kind of melting. Bring up the snow amount, increase the snow coverage, lower the smoothing iterations. So we've got a few controls here. Let's start previewing this in the scene, And we'll start dialing it in. So, I mean, already I'm liking that volume. It's got that natural sort of puffy, snowy feeling. I'm going to drag out iterations into a group input as well. And I'm just going to call that melt, snow size, yeah, and snow coverage. So snow size, give us a bit more detail. Melt is going to smooth it out, and coverage is just going to reduce how much it has actually snowed. I'm just going to preview from here, just so we can get a sense about what's happening under the hood. Okay, I will set this down again, because it seems like it's going to give me just a little bit more information. So snow size, snow coverage, let's go 0 melt, a little bit of smoothing by default, probably. And then finally, we just want to set material to be snow. Let me just double check that this is working. I think what I've done here is my snow actually has rock in it. So I'm actually going to call this snow and rock. I'm just going to hit this little 5 here to make it unique. And I'm just going to call this snow. And for this one, I'm literally just going to drag out the snow into the surface. We don't need any of this. And now I can go back to the snow in the geo nodes, and we'll just select snow. And there we go. So our rock's now covered in snow. And again, we can go back into the shader and we'll add snow. So we'll go snow blend, grab our snow group, and same as before, join those together with the snow factor. And that's going to add just a little bit more to it. So you can kind of use the combination of the shader and the node now, and you can sort of just tweak the melt, bring the size down. So checking this out, we've used that combination of approaches to turn this rock into this rock. So changing the texture, adding snow, quite fun. So the nice thing about this is that now that I have this set up, I can duplicate these around. And even if I make like some slight, like say, let's scale this up, scale it out on the Y, and I'll apply those transforms, it's going to look a little bit different each time. And I can change the size, or I can change the amount of coverage, the amount of melt, and even just using that single mesh, I'm creating a bunch of variation. So what I've also done here is just added a few inputs to that map range on the trench, made sure scale is applied. So now I've got a control for trench width, the slope of the trench. You can see that's just plugging into these different sections here that we set up before, and trench depth. So here's our little trench. And the last thing I want to do is just scatter around a few things, cover them in snow. So I'm going to bring in a few branches from a photo scan pack that I made recently. If you want to grab that, feel free to run on over to my Gumroad to pick those up. So let's call this collection sticks, and we'll do another simple GeoNode scattering setup here. So this one I'm calling curve trench. I'll just do another one here called basic scatter, or let's go draw on scatter. So I'm going to get a distribute points on faces, Control Shift drag those to join, and I might just drag this here. It's a bit easier to see. This is what we want to edit. So on these points, I want to instance on points. And I've got these in a collection called sticks. So I'm just going to drag out collection info, set this to relative, and check these boxes, pick instance, and then we can hit sticks. And I drop this down to Poisson disk, and then I can drag out the density factor and expose it. I'm going to hit this little icon here, and on this mesh, I'm just going to start. Let's go in edit mode so we can see. I'll go into weight paint. Let's just get a bit of info here, and then I'm just going to select group. So now I have a setup where I can paint where I want these sticks to go. Quite nice. And let's add a little bit of randomness to it. So drag this out. We'll go random value. Let's just reset all the values and say, let's do a little bit of rotation on the Z, a tad bit rotation in this direction and this direction. So we've got a bit of randomness there. And then I want to tweak the scale as well. So same thing. So this time I'm just going to type in random instead of dragging out, because that's going to give me some float parameters instead of vector parameters. And that's just going to allow me to uniformly scale these between two different values. So let's go maybe 0.8, 0.5, and 1.5, something like this. Let's just set my density down a little bit, something like that. So random sticks, which I can paint on. If I hit Control, I can remove them, which is quite fun. Let's say maybe there's like a riverbed with sticks or something. Kind of fun. So what I might do now is, let's add some snow to the tops of these as well. And there we go. And you can scatter anything else you want in the same way. So I'm going to drag in this wall asset that I made from some photo scans recently. And let's cover this in snow. And you can grab these from the same photo pack in my Gumroad if you like. And I might not even need there to be any snow accumulating here. But let's see what happens if I cover in snow. So for whatever reason, sometimes when I bring in assets, the snow is not quite big enough. So I just like to scale these up and apply scale. And that's going to give me a little bit more control. And then I can scale them back down. I'm not sure why that is, but some of the assets that I've got here, that's how they behave. Let's just melt this a little bit more, up the coverage. Go. So it's that extra layer. And if you don't want to scale up and down to fix those issues, you can actually hit Control period, and then that's going to edit the scale options without actually changing the mesh size. So change it to something where the snow starts influencing that correctly. Then I can hit Control period as well to get out of it. And that minimum is there in place just to protect your performance, but you can manually type in a lower value if you want. So there we go, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Got a few things covered today, including this fully procedural river. Nice thing about this is that the objects being scattered stay on that environment as well. Quite fun. And one of my favorite things to do is make fun tools like this for Blender. So if you're interested in staying in the loop with any fun node presets that I end up creating, definitely consider subscribing and signing up to the mailing list. Cheers. See you next time. Bye-bye.